Dusk bled across the sky like a dying ember as Colt Avery reined in at the edge of Crestfall's tiny cemetery. Lanterns bobbed between shadowy figures, their smoky halos shimmering in the dust. Someone barked at the undertaker to hurry before the night winds rise. The voice belonged to Sheriff Harlan Price, a hulking man whose impatience crackled louder than the cicadas. He stood over the fresh coffin, boots planted wide, thumbs hooked into a tarnished star that glinted in the fading light. Colt swung down from his roan, the horse snorting at the scent of overturned earth. He'd only stopped in Crestfall to water his canteen. Yet the tension in the air tugged at an old nerve he could never quite numb. The undertaker hammered the lid shut 5 hurried blows, pine splintering beneath each strike. No preacher offered a psalm, no mourning kin wept beside the grave. Only a few townsfolk clustered in tight knots, whispering behind gloved hands as if guilt might be contagious. That's enough. Price cut the undertaker a sharp look. Fill it. The gravedigger shoveled fast. Colt caught the sliver of a face inside the coffin before the lid fell. Female, late 20s, dark lashes fanning against a bruised temple. Mercy Caldwell. Someone muttered horse accident by the river, tragic but quick. Colt noticed how the bruising still blushed purple, not the dull marbling of the truly gone. Wind hissed through mesquite. A lone raven settled on a nearby headstone, tilting its head to peck at a strip of upturned soil. The sound was a delicate tapped it. It snagged Colt's attention like a thorn. He stepped closer, drawing a look from Price Evening. Colt offered, voice low. Move along, the sheriff grunted. Town business. Usually funerals bring out a preacher. Colt kept his tone easy, the way you spoke to a stallion ready to bolt. Price's gaze was flat as creek rock. Parsons down with fever. We ain't waitin'. He gestured at the lanterns. Night Rider soul be on the trail soon enough. Best you find a room or ride out. Colt tipped his hat, but the doubt dug its spurs in. The diggers patted the final mound into place. Not a single prayer. Not even a mark of just churned desert clay. The raven hopped onto the fresh soil, pecking again. Colt's gut tightened. In the war he'd seen graves sealed fast to hide more than death men still twitching beneath plank lids. Doctors calling it mercy when the morphine ran dry. He had sworn never to let another soul scratch for air while the world looked away. He led his horse to the water trough outside the livery, eyes flicking back to the cemetery. The undertaker extinguished a lantern and trudged off. Townsfolk scattered. Like leaves, Price lingered longest, lighting a cheroot before finally heading down the main street's boardwalk. Spurs CLINKING. Colt filled his canteen, hands steady despite the pulse hammering in his wrists. The sky faded from bruised violet to obsidian. Coyotes howled beyond the hills, answered by the hollow hush of wind between adobe walls. He considered riding on just another drifter with ghosts enough of his own, but the memory of that bruised temple clung to him. He walked his horse to the modest stable behind the mercantile, paid the hostler for a stall, and kept to the shadows as he retraced his steps toward the graveyard. Lamps inside the saloon pooled golden light beneath swinging doors. Yet no music spilled out, only murmurs and the clink of glasses as if the whole town held its breath. At the cemetery gate the raven was gone. A wisp of sand whisked over the fresh mound, erasing bootprints. Colt crouched, pressing a palm to the earth. Still warm from the day's heat, but something else, a faint tremor he almost dismissed as heartbeat echo. He leaned closer, a whisper, then a sigh scratching, then silence. The wind lulled, and again faint claws against wood, rhythmic, desperate. Colt straightened, pulse roaring. He scanned the dark forewatchers. None. His hunting knife slid free with barely a rasp. He started digging, first with gloved hands, then using the blade as a trowel. Muscle memory from battlefield graves kicking in. The soil yielded in damp clumps. Each scrape brought the scratching louder. Frantic. Minutes stretched, sweat stinging. His eyes, moonlight painting his shoulders silver. Finally the coffin lid surfaced, dirt cascading off like spilled grain. He wedged the knife under the top plank. The wood groaned, nails squealing as he pried it up. Inside, Mercy caught. Eyes flew wide, glassy with terror yet bright with life. A gag muffled her cry. Her wrists were bound with stained ribbon, her lungs hitched in ragged sobs as air flooded the pine box. Colt sliced the gag in ties, pulled her upright. She clutched his coat, nails biting through fabric as if anchoring herself to the world. It's all right, he breathed, though his heart raced. You're out, she rasped, voice raw. Don't let them see me. Them. The word carried every answer he needed. He hauled her into his arms lighter than. She looked, bones trembling, and staggered toward the cemetery fence. Somewhere in town a door slammed. Dogs barked. Colt pressed on, vanishing into sagebrush where his horse waited. Tethered in darkness, he laid Mercy across the saddle, swung up behind, and guided the roan south toward the abandoned way station. He'd spotted earlier a shell of sun-bleached adobe a mile beyond the river gorge. Night insects shrilled around them. Mercy's fingers clutched his shirt, her breaths short, panicked. Halfway there the moon slipped from a cloud, unveiling her profile, dirt's mid-cheek, streaked mascara from tears no one had bothered to wipe. yet her eyes held a hard ember of resolve that reminded Colt of soldiers who'd crawled out of shell craters refusing to die when they reached the station. He set her down inside the cracked doorway. Dust swirled in their lamplight as he lit a stub of candle found in his saddlebag. She winced as he dabbed whiskey on her bruised temple, but her gaze never left his face, studying him with startled gratitude and lingering fear. "Who did this?" he asked, voice soft as the flame between them. Mercy swallowed. "Ransom Pikey wants my family's water rights. Sheriff's in his pocket." Her lips trembled. "They thought burying me would be easier than forging a deed." Colt's jaw clenched. A memory flashed, his unit stumbling upon a massacred farmstead, graves disguised as mounds of ash. Rage mixed with the old ache he carried, the men he couldn't save. "You're safe for now," he promised, binding a strip of his bandana around her wrist where rope had burned skin. "We'll get you clear of Pike, or see him in the ground. He chose for you." Mercy's shoulders shook, exhaustion pulling her eyelids half-mast, yet she managed a thin smile, the first spark of trust crossing the gulf between strangers. Outside, the raven cried once an echo in the desert dark as if marking the moment fate rewrote its script. Somewhere behind Colt, the cemetery waited, silent and simmering with the secret he'd unearthed. Ahead lay a night of unknown dangers, but for the first time since the war he felt the faint stir of purpose. A promise hammered from pine and moonlight: he would not fail this woman buried too soon. Night settled over the adobe shell like a heavy curtain, muting the desert's rustle. Colt knelt beside the lantern, working the cork from his whiskey flask with fingers still packed with cemetery soil. Sweat cooled on his neck, turning moonlit air to ice. Mercy sat propped against a crumbling wall, curls stuck to her cheeks, wrists purple where ribbon had bitten. Every so often her gaze slipped past Colt to the black doorway, half expecting Pike's gunmen to materialize. An hour earlier he'd heard the first telltale sound, a slow scrape, faint as a cricket, threading through the wind. At first he'd thought it some loose shutter at the undertaker's, but the rhythm had been too desperate. Claw against wood, claw against time. He'd pressed an ear to the grave soil, heart stammering when the scratching sharpened into muffled screams. Panic had driven him to dig like an animal, flinging handfuls of dirt until his knife struck pine. Now, the sounds replayed in his skull, each splintering nail an echo of the war trenches where he'd once tunneled for dying comrades. He tipped a stream of whiskey onto a strip of cloth and dabbed Mercy's wounds. The liquor hissed against raw skin. She didn't flinch, only released a trembling breath. "Thank you," she whispered. The words scraped like gravel, throat sand raw from breathing coffin dust. Colt produced his canteen, sip slow. "Too fast'll make you sick." He guided the water to her lips. She drank, coughed, drank again, pupils still blown wide with fright. Moonlight slanted through a gap in the roof, painting silver bars across the floor. Mercy traced them with her eyes as though measuring a jail she'd escaped. Finally she spoke. "I heard them in the back room at the saloon. Pike, Sheriff Price, the banker. They said the Caldwell place had the only spring left running year-round, and if I signed it over they'd take care of me." Her laugh was brittle. Turns out taking care meant a shovel and a pine box. Colt tightened the knot on her bandaged jaw, flexing. "They drugged you. Bottle of cordial on the bar. I tasted laudanum before the glass left my lips." She brushed dirt from her skirt, hands shaking. "When I woke, I was in the coffin. I thought it was a dream until the hammer came down." Her voice cracked, tears starting though she fought them. Colt offered the flask again, gentler this time. "Drink. Not for the sting, for the memory." He took a slow pull himself, letting heat calm the tremor in his gut. "I've seen men buried for less than land. A soldier I bunked with got planted alive when the medics misheard a heartbeat. He clawed through 3 inches of cratewood before we heard him. Took weeks to wash the splinters from his palms." He stared into the lantern flame, losing himself in orange flicker. "I swore that day never to let the earth keep someone who still had breath." Mercy watched him as if reassessing each scar on his knuckles. "Why stop tonight? Could have turned your horse south and never known. The wind carried your voice." He managed a half smile. "Besides, I was thirsty. If I'd skipped the trough, you'd be cursing my name in the hereafter." She curled a strand of hair behind one ear, something fragile blooming in her expression. Trust not the blind, grateful sort, but the wary faith of a woman who understood exactly how much she'd gambled on a stranger. The lantern sputtered. Colt adjusted the wick, and the glow drew them closer, breath mingling in a space no wider than a prayer. Her eyelids drooped. Colt unrolled his bedroll, easing it beneath her shoulders. "Rest dawns a few hours off. We ride when you can sit a saddle." She caught his wrist. "They'll come, I know." We squeezed her fingers, feeling the pulse that proved she was alive. Let em. She drifted toward sleep, but memories kept yanking her back. Short flashes, the banker's oily grin, Price pressing 2 fingers to her throat and declaring no pulse. Pike joking they'd saved on funeral costs by skipping a parson. Each image punched breath from her, yet Colt's presence wove between them, a silent vow. Outside, the wind rose. Sand rattled against adobe walls like skeletal applause. Colt laid a fresh log in the hearth's shattered mouth. coaxing sparks until thin flames lapped the wood. He lingered over the fire, replaying every footstep he'd taken since arriving, checking for tracks he might have left, signs someone tailed him. Memory offered none, but instinct pricked the hairs on his neck. Pike's sort didn't sleep easy when loose ends walked the desert. Mercy stirred with a soft cry. Colt squatted beside her, smoothing hair from her brow. Dreams gravel on the lid, she murmured. I tried to scream, but dirt filled my mouth. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, though they remained closed. Colt gripped her hand until the tremor eased, whispering an old army, cadence low, steady, mindless. The rhythm lulled her back under. He stayed like that, palm to palm, until the fire dwindled. Lantern light pooled around them, the rest of the room swallowed by night. Somewhere beyond the walls, a coyote yipped, answered by another farther off, wild voices carrying news across miles of open dark. In town, Colt imagined. Doors bolted, yet whispers bred like ants. Coffin lid missing, grave torn open, Mercy Caldwell's name spoken as if it might summon her ghost. He thought of the raven at the graveside, head cocked as if listening for heartbeats beneath layered soil. Some tribes called ravens messengers between worlds. Maybe the bird had waited to see which realm Mercy would choose, and had flown off satisfied that the balance was restored. A beam of moonlight slid off the rafters and came to rest on Mercy's face, illuminating the grit in her lashes. Colt brushed it away, almost reverent. She sighed, lips parting, her breath warm on his wrist. In that brittle silence, scarred by battle, one scraped raw by betrayal, found a thin thread that might tether them to tomorrow. Colt settled against the wall, rifled across his knees, eyes on the doorway where the desert night pooled blackest. He would hold that watch, until daybreak, until the sun chased the shadows back into their holes. If Pike's riders came, they'd learn the hard way that a man who once dug through corpses to find the living could shoot just as unflinchingly to keep the living alive. Mercy murmured something he couldn't catch. Maybe a prayer, maybe Colt's own name. Either way, he answered with the only promise that mattered. He squeezed her hand, steady and sure, and did not let go. Far across the salt flats, the wind carried word of the open grave like wildfire, fast and reckless. Ransom Pike sat behind the saloon's back office desk, boots propped beside an open ledger, when a breathless deputy stormed in with dirty boots and trembling hands. Grave's empty, he choked. The Caldwell girl, she's gone. Pike didn't speak at first. He just leaned forward, expression flat as cured leather, then flicked ash from his cigar into the drawer of ledgers. And deeds, get the riders. Tell M to saddle by moonrise. I want her and whoever dug her up. His voice dropped to a growl. Alive, if they're dumb enough to stay still. By the time the hooves hit the trail, Mercy and Colt were already 2 ridges south of Crestfall, skimming the flats on a pair of lathered horses, silhouettes sharp under the high desert moon. The salt shimmered around them like bone dust, cracked and endless. A distant orange glow hung over the horizon, wildfire, likely from last week's lightning strike, the kind of thing the townsfolk whispered was an omen. Colt rode low in the saddle, his gaze sharp and scanning. Canyon's another hour, he said over the wind. The walls will slow M if they're tracking. Mercy clutched her reins tighter, her borrowed coat flapping. If we make it, she'd barely slept, bruises still blooming, but her spine stayed straight and unflinching. Colt glanced her way just a flicker, but it said enough. She wasn't a woman who needed saving. She was a woman who'd already clawed her way back from death and wasn't about to be buried again. They rode until the horse beneath Mercy faltered front, hoof catching in a rut. She pitched forward, catching herself on the saddle horn with a grunt of pain. Colt pulled up fast, circling back. Damn it, he muttered, dismounting. You all right? Mercy slid down on her own, legs trembling, but held up a hand. I can walk. That ankle's turning purple. Then I'll limp. Colt paused, watching her lean hard on one leg, teeth clenched. She met his stare, stubborn fire behind the pain. I've already climbed out of a coffin. I'll manage a canyon. They hobbled forward together, Colt leading both horses now. The flats gave way to red rock shadows and sloping ravines. Somewhere behind them, a hawk cried too close. Mercy winced with each step, but never complained. They found a patch of stone under a wind-carved arch and lit a small fire, cupped between rocks to hide the glow. Colt handed her his coat, and she curled up against a saddlebag, exhaling slow. The canyon walls around them breathed cold. I keep thinking about it, she said quietly, eyes reflecting flame. If you hadn't heard me, if your horse had kept walking, I'd still be down there, just bones and splinters. Colt fed another stick into the fire. I've seen worse graves, shallower ones, quieter. Mercy's voice dropped. Dude, they stay with you, the dead. Every night. He didn't look at her, but the fire cast flickers across the hard line of his jaw. Sometimes I see their hands reaching up from dirt. Sometimes I hear them breathe. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still the one buried. Mercy shifted, the movement tender. That's why you came back. Didn't want another ghost to carry. Silence stretched. The fire crackled. Coyotes called far off. Mercy touched the revolver he'd given her, a heavy iron thing, resting now in her lap like a promise. If they catch us, they won't. But if they do, he looked at her then, full on. Then one of us finishes what the law refused to start. The moon dipped behind a ridge. Shadows swelled, and with them came the faint thunder of hooves. Colt rose instantly, dousing the fire with sand. Up Mercy stood, balancing on her good leg. Colt helped her onto his own horse, swinging up behind her. They took off down a dry creek bed just as the first shots cracked through dawn. Gunpowder stung the air. Bullets ripped through mesquite, sending red dust flying. Colt fired once, downing a rider whose silhouette lit in the early sun. Another bullet skinned his arm. He didn't flinch. They ducked into a rock slot, walls rising on both sides. Colt handed Mercy the revolver. 3 behind us. If I fall, shoot straight. She nodded, grip steady despite the tremor in her shoulders. Her first shot went wide, but her second grazed the lead rider, who yelped and veered off, clutching his arm. Colt dropped another with a clean shot to the leg. The third man hesitated, saw his friends fall, then yanked reins and vanished behind a bluff. Silence slammed into the canyon like a door closing. Colt's chest heaved. Mercy still held the revolver up, eyes wide but triumphant. I hit him, she whispered. I hit him. Colt smiled. That you did. The sun crested the ridge behind her, casting gold fire across the red stone and framing her in light. She stood tall, bloodied coat and tangled hair glowing like a saint carved from desert sunrise. He looked at her, this woman they'd tried to bury, and saw not just someone who survived but someone reborn. Sun crowns the far hills as Colt and Mercy crests the last rise above Crestfall. Overnight dust still powders their clothes, streaking their skin, but they ride side by side, heads high. The church bell hasn't begun its 6 o'clock toll yet. Townsfolk already mill in the street, lured by rumor of hoofbeats and the taste of something unsettled in the air. Conversations die as eyes settle on the woman they buried, now upright in the saddle, coat flapping like resurrection cloth. Gasps ripple through the crowd. A schoolboy drops his slate. A laundress crosses herself. The undertaker's jaw goes slack. Ransom Pike stands on the saloon porch flanked by 2 hired guns. He stiffens, fingers going to the pearl handle at his belt, but Mercy swings down first, unassisted, boots hitting ground with a thud that seems to shake loose every lie he ever told. She limps only slightly now. Her voice carries clear as dawn. Morning, Mr. Pike. You misplaced something. Last night figured I'd return it. She taps her temple where the bruise blooms, and perhaps reclaim what's mine. Pike's smile is a brittle slash. Sheriff, arrest these trespassers. Sheriff Price steps from the jail, coat flapping to reveal his holstered iron. One arm is slung from Colt's bullet the day before, the hand that rests on his gun but trembles. Colt dismounts slowly, eyes never leaving Price. Thought you'd be nursing that wing, he drawls. Guess a crooked man ain't smart enough to know when he's broken. Mercy walks to the center of Main Street, pulls crumpled papers from her pocket, ledger entries copied in her own neat hand during stolen minutes at Pike's desk. These show every illegal deed transfer, every bribe, every false claim you filed. She tells the growing ring of townsfolk, including the one that labeled me dead. She meets each face: shopkeepers, livery boys, ranch wives. The parson leaning on his cane and finds in their eyes a spark of outrage fanning quick into fire. Ask yours, who'll be next when your land's worth more than your life. Pike's veneer cracks. Sweat darkens his collar. Lies, he spits. Colt steps forward, shrugging his duster off his wounded shoulder. Then you won't mind an honest duel to settle talk. He plants himself 10 paces down the street, right boot heel scuffing the dirt. You and me, Sheriff, town watches. No tin star tricks. Price blinks, weighed down suddenly by the badge on his vest. Honor never sat easy on his chest, but pride pushes him out anyway. He squares up opposite Colt, lips peeled in a snarl. Pike hisses a warning, but the crowd hymns him in. Crescent-shaped shadows of men and women hungry for justice leave him no room to flee. The parson, pale but upright, rasps. On the bell, the church tower clangs once metal striking dawn. Both hands flash down. A single shot cracks like thunder in canyon walls. Colt's revolver bucks. Price's fires a heartbeat late. Colt's bullet punches through the sheriff's star, spinning it into the dirt. Price's round scorches Colt's sleeve, carving a shallow groove in muscle. Price staggers, eyes round, then collapses with a grunt, weapon skittering away. Silence devours the street until Mercy lets out a breath she's been holding since sunrise. Pike's guards lift their guns, but the crowd is fast. A shopkeeper, blacksmith, even the undertaker leveling rifles kept beneath counters too long. Pike backs against the saloon post, sweat dripping. Mercy approaches him, voice steady. You forged my death, but I remember everything you signed. She drops the copied pages into his hand like the weight of his own gallows. Let the judge decide how deep you'll dig. The banker tries to edge away. A ranch wife blocks him with her broom handle. By noon, Circuit Judge Whittaker, laid a day by the same wildfire glow that lit Mercy's escape, sits at a hastily cleared bar table, townsfolk packed shoulder to shoulder. Mercy's testimony unfurls in calm, measured lines. Colt confirms. The grave. Whittaker slams his gavel. Deeds voided, Ranch restored to Mercy, Pike and Price bound for territorial prison. The saloon erupts, cheers bouncing off whiskey bottles, hats flung high enough to brush the rafters. Mercy's gaze finds Colt through the crush, and in that glance he sees relief, pride, a fragile dawning of something gentler than survival. Later, with the sun tilting west, they walk beyond town to the cemetery. The grave still gapes, boards scattered like broken ribs. Mercy kneels, pressing a yucca cutting roots wrapped in damp cloth into the loosened soil. Colt hands her his canteen. She waters the sprout, patting dirt firm. Yucca survives on nearly nothing, she murmurs, blooms when the desert thinks it can't. Her fingers linger on the leaves. Colt slips his hand over hers, warmth steady despite a bandaged shoulder. They stand together while wind combs the grass, watching the plant claim its unlikely home. Mercy brushes dust from her skirts. You heading on? She asks. Depends where the trail leads. He nods toward the ranchland peeking blue-green beyond the ridge. Might be fences need mending. She smiles, small and bright. Plenty of work, plenty of sunrise too. Colt looks at the yucca, stubborn against the grave's rim. Second chances, he says. She squeezes his fingers. He doesn't let go. Distant church bells begin their evening hymn as they walk back along the path. Boots crunching gravel in easy rhythm. Overhead swallows wheel through coral sky, stitching the day shut. A voice seems to ride the hush, as if told by the very wind that carried Mercy's first scratch. Some souls the desert tries to keep, but the ones who listen beyond midnight save more than a single life. They rewrite fate.